The ballroom was gleaming. 600 guests in tuxedos and gowns, champagne flutes catching the chandelier light. The kind of room where deals get made with handshakes and futures get buried under smiles. And right there, in the middle of all of it, a man in grey coveralls was on his knees, scrubbing the floor. His name was Everett Kane, and 3 years ago this building had his name on the deed.
Now, before we go further, I need you to stop for a second, because I know what you're thinking. How does a man go from owning a building to mopping its floors? How does someone with everything end up with nothing overnight? And here's the part that should scare you. He didn't lose it to a stranger. He lost it to the people sitting at his dinner table every Sunday.
The man they forced out of his own company is now cleaning the floors of his own gala. Let that land. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you signed something without reading it? Have you ever believed so hard in someone's love that you handed them the keys to your whole life? Then you already understand Everett Kane. Here's the ugly truth this story rips open. The people most likely to betray you are the ones who already know your passwords. But stay with me, because what they didn't know about Everett Kane, what nobody in that ballroom knew, was that the man scrubbing their floors had already written every single one of their endings. Dallas, Texas. The Whitmore Grand Hotel. It was the annual Kane Industries shareholder gala. Except this year, Everett Kane hadn't received an invitation. He'd been given a mop. His brother-in-law, Daxon Whitfield, had personally called the temp agency. He'd asked for reliable service staff for an upscale private event, and somehow, whether it was fate, karma, or just the universe with a wicked sense of humor, the agency sent Everett. Daxon didn't recognize him at first. The grey coveralls, the cap was pulled low, the quiet way Everett moved through the crowd, invisible the way service workers always are in rooms full of important people. But then Daxon's wife, Everett's own sister, Corinne, she turned from a conversation with a board member, wine glass in hand, and her eyes landed on the man dragging a mop bucket across the marble floor of what used to be her brother's empire. She froze. Her smile didn't fall, it curdled. Everett? Everett looked up slowly. There was no shock on his face, no shame, no urgency. His eyes were flat and quiet, like a lake in January. Evening, Corinne. The word fell like a stone into still water. Daxon had crossed the room by then, a man built like a cornerback and dressed like a senator. Silver cufflinks, Italian shoes, and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. He looked at Everett with the particular disgust of a man who believed he had already won. "Well?" Daxon said, loud enough for the small circle around them to hear. "I always said you'd find your level eventually." Low laughter from two men near the bar. Someone whispered to someone else, and Everett did something that confused everyone in that room. He looked at Daxon, he looked at Corinne, he looked at the mop in his hand, and he went back to mopping. No reaction, no tears, no rage. Just the slow, steady push of that mop across the floor. Two women near the catering table watched him. Isn't that the man who used to run this company? They said he signed everything away. In one night. What kind of man does that? The kind of man who trusted the wrong family. Nobody said it loud enough for Everett to hear. But he heard it anyway. He always did. Oh, let's go back, because you need to understand what they took, and how they took it, to understand what Everett built in its place. 3 years ago, Everett Kane was 38 years old, and at the top of a mountain he had climbed himself. Kane Industries, construction, real estate and infrastructure contracts across Texas, Arizona and Nevada. 700 employees. Offices in Dallas, Phoenix and Las Vegas. Built from a $50,000 loan and 12 years of 5 a.m. mornings. He hadn't inherited it. He hadn't married into it. He'd bled for every brick of it. And then he fell in love. Her name was Bridget Whitfield. She was the kind of woman who made a room rearrange itself without asking. Sharp, beautiful, Funny in that quiet way where the joke lands 10 seconds after she says it and you're still laughing by yourself at 2 a.m. Everett had met her at a Phoenix charity auction. She was bidding on a sculpture, he was bidding on the same one, and they'd ended up splitting it and arguing over where it would live for the next 6 months. He married her 14 months later. It was the happiest day of his life. It was also the beginning of the end. Bridget Ticket's family, the Whitfields, were old money from Houston, or so they claimed. They had the right addresses, the right clubs, the right last names. What they did not have was liquidity. Everett didn't know that part yet. 6 months after the wedding, Bridget's father, Radford Whitfield, a man with silver hair and the confident handshake of someone who has never doubted himself even once in 70 years, invited Everett to dinner. Not just family dinner, a structured meeting, printed materials, a proposal. Radford called it a family expansion deal. "We want to bring our land assets into your infrastructure framework," Radford said, sliding a folder across the table. "A merger of family resources. You bring the operating engine, we bring the land portfolio. Together we become something neither of us can build alone." Daxon sat beside his father, nodding along like a man who had rehearsed his face. Corinne, Everett's own sister, sat across the table, the one who had first introduced him to Bridget, smiling warmly. Bridget sat next to Everett and squeezed his hand under the table. He trusted every single person in that room. That was the mistake. He didn't read the full document. Not the way a man should read a document that has his signature on the last page. He skimmed it. He asked 2 questions. He got 2 confident answers. And he signed. Because they were family. Because Bridget was smiling. Because Radford had clasped his shoulder and said, "Welcome to the next chapter, son." What Everett signed that night was not a partnership agreement. It was a control transfer. Buried in Clause 14C of a 47-page document was a provision that, upon the execution of the Family Expansion Protocol, operational and financial control of Kane Industries would shift to a jointly appointed board, with majority representation from the Whitfield Family Trust. In other words, he signed over his company. He just didn't know it yet. The night Everett Kane lost everything was the night he trusted his own family. 2. The takeover took 11 weeks. Slow enough that Everett didn't realize it was happening. Fast enough that by the time he did, it was already done. His signature was on every piece of paper. His name was removed from every door. The lawyers the Whitfields used were from a firm in Houston, 7 of them, each one specializing in a different piece of corporate law, each one hired to make sure there was no crack Everett could crawl through. When Everett finally walked into a meeting with his own attorney, a woman named Priscilla Vane, one of the sharpest minds in Dallas, she read through the documents for 4 hours and then set them down on the table between them. "Everett," she said very quietly, "I need you to understand something. Every line in here is legal. Every clause is signed. Every transfer was witnessed." He stared at the documents. "What are my options? You could fight it in court. It would take 3 to 5 years. It would cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. And based on what they've constructed here," she shook her head, "even then, the outcome is not guaranteed." The room felt very small. Or you walk. You take what they didn't touch. You rebuild. Everett sat in that chair for a long time. And then he made a decision that no one, not Radford, not Daxon, not Bridget, not even Corinne, saw coming. He stood up. He thanked Priscilla. And he walked out of that office smiling. Here is the thing about a man who built something from nothing. He always knows which part of the foundation is his alone. 3 weeks before the Whitfields' lawyers had finalized their takeover, before the last page was signed, before the board seats were reassigned, Everett had quietly moved his real wealth into a protected trust. Not the company, not the buildings. The real wealth, the kind you can't see on a balance sheet. The contracts that hadn't been signed yet. The land parcels were held in a private LLC registered in Nevada under a name nobody in the Whitfield family had ever heard. The offshore accounts connected to construction deals in Arizona that had not yet been folded into Kane Industries. And, most importantly, the recordings. Everett Kane had been recording his meetings with the Whitfields for 9 months. Every dinner, every phone call, every casual conversation where Radford let something slip, every moment where Daxon forgot that walls have ears. He had kept his silence. He had built his case. He had waited. And now, 3 years later, he was mopping a floor in a ballroom that used to carry his name above its entrance. But the man holding the mop was not a broken man. He was a patient one. The gala was in full swing. Daxon worked the room the way a man works a room when he's certain he's untouchable. Drink in hand, name-dropping, talking numbers with board members who didn't know him 8 years ago. Radford held court by the window the way old men with power always do. They make the room come to them. Bridget was there too, in a red dress. She looked stunning. That part hadn't changed, but she held her champagne a little tighter than she used to, laughed a little louder, the way people do when they're performing happiness rather than feeling it. She didn't look at Everett. Not once. And that, more than anything else in the room, told him everything. There was one other person at that gala who didn't belong to either side. Her name was Wren Aldridge. She was a journalist, investigative, the kind that printed things that made powerful people lose sleep. She'd been covering Kane Industries for 2 years, first the rise, then the takeover, then the silence. She'd been the only reporter who had actually asked out loud, "Something doesn't add up here." Nobody had answered her then. She stood near the entrance with a glass of sparkling water, watching the room with the careful stillness of someone who has learned that the most important thing in journalism is knowing when to listen. She watched Daxon. She watched Radford. She watched Everett move through the crowd with his mop, invisible to everyone, noticed by no one. And then, for just 1 second, her eyes met his. He gave her the smallest nod. She gave him nothing back. But she pulled out her phone and opened her notes. It was near 11 o'clock when Bridget finally walked toward the service corridor. She wasn't looking for him. She was looking for a quiet second, away from the noise, away from the performance of a life that had started to feel like a costume. She turned the corner. And there he was, Everett, leaning against the wall. No mop now, he'd set it aside. Cap in his hand, looking at the framed photograph mounted just inside the corridor. The original groundbreaking of this building 8 years ago. He was in the photo, younger, grinning, hard hat slightly crooked. Bridget stopped. Her breath went somewhere she couldn't find it. "Everett?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He turned. He looked at her the way you look at someone you once loved when you've had enough time to understand exactly what that love cost you. "You look well, Bridget." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Yes, you did," he said. "Not mean, just true." She swallowed. "Everett, whatever you're thinking about doing." "I'm not thinking about doing anything," he said gently. "I'm just cleaning the floors, isn't that right?" The silence between them held everything that hadn't been said in 3 years. Then Daxon's voice rang down the corridor. "Bridget, Radford needs you at the table." She looked at Everett one more time. He was already looking back at the photograph. She walked away, and the corridor was quiet again. By midnight, the gala was winding toward its formal close. The event coordinator, a man named Prescott, all earpiece and clipboard, stepped to the small stage at the far end of the ballroom. He tapped the microphone. The room began to settle. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude this evening, we have one brief piece of formal business. Just a routine update to the Kane Industries family holding structure. A simple document requiring board signature. Mr. Whitfield has asked that all senior board members step forward. Standard, bureaucratic, boring." No one read the document carefully. Why would they? It was routine. It was late. They had champagne in their hands. Radford signed first with the confidence of a man who has never needed to read fine print. Daxon signed second, barely glancing at the page. 3 other board members followed. Radford's own attorney, a man named Godfrey Marsh, who had been standing at the edge of the group, leaned in briefly as Radford signed. His eyes slid over the page. His brow moved just slightly. He started to say something. Daxon cut in smoothly. "It's standard, Godfrey. We cleared it last week." Godfrey paused. "I don't recall approving." "You were copied on the email," Daxon said easily. "It's fine." Godfrey looked at the page one more time, looked at Radford, who had already moved on to shaking hands with someone nearby. He let it go. That would be a mistake he'd think about for the rest of his professional life. Across the ballroom, Everett watched all of it from behind his card. His face was perfectly still. Inside his chest, something that had been wound tight for 3 years finally, quietly began to release. He thought, the same trick, just written by a better hand. Dallas, Texas. The Whitmore Grand Hotel, 12:07 a.m. The signing was done. Prescott had collected the documents. The board members had drifted back to their conversations. Radford Whitfield was accepting congratulations from a man in a blue tuxedo who didn't fully understand what he was congratulating him for. Daxon poured himself a drink. The night was ending the way it was supposed to end. With the Whitfields in control of everything, and Everett Kane somewhere near the service corridor, invisible and forgotten. And then the screens glitched. All 4 of them. The massive presentation displays mounted on the ballroom walls, the ones used earlier for shareholder slides, flickered once, twice. The room barely noticed. People assumed it was a technical issue, the kind that happens at events like this. Someone near the stage made a joke about the AV team. Then the screens came back on. And this time, what they showed was not a shareholder presentation. It was a corporate ownership chart. Clean, clear, every box is labeled, every arrow pointing exactly where it pointed. And at the very top of that chart, where the Whitfield Family Trust had sat for 3 years, was a different name. Kane Capital Holdings, sole controlling interest. The room went quiet in stages. First the people closest to the screens. Then the people who saw those people go quiet. Then everyone. 600 people. Complete silence. The kind of silence that has weight. Daxon's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes moved from one screen to the next to the next. His brain was doing the math, rejecting the answer, doing the math again. Wait. That name. Someone whispered near the bar. That's him, that's Kane. The man who was cleaning. No, that's not possible. Radford Whitfield turned slowly from his conversation. He put on his reading glasses, the ones he kept in his breast pocket for moments requiring careful attention, and he looked at the screen. And for the first time in 70 years, Radford Whitfield had nothing to say. Everett Kane walked out from the service corridor. No coveralls now. He had changed in the last 20 minutes. Navy suit, no tie, collar open just enough to say, "I am not here to impress you." White pocket square, the calm of a man who has been sitting on a secret for 36 months and has just decided the wait is over. He crossed the ballroom floor. The crowd parted without being asked. Not out of respect. Not yet. Out of instinct. The instinct people have when they sense that the gravity of a room has shifted and someone new is at the center of it. He stopped in the middle of the floor. He said nothing. He just stood there and let the screens do the talking. 30 seconds of silence. You could hear the ice settle in the glasses. Radford Whitfield moved first. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, the private line, the one connected directly to his financial team. He dialed. He waited. His face changed. It changed the way a face changes when a person asks a question and receives an answer that cannot be right, so they ask again, and the answer is the same, and suddenly the solid ground they have been standing on for 70 years turns into something that moves. Our accounts, Radford said very quietly, not to anyone, to himself. Why are they frozen? Daxon was already on his own phone. Then off it goes. Then on it again. His assistant, his personal banker, his attorney. 3 calls, 90 seconds. His face went from confusion to something much harder to look at. Godfrey Marsh, Radford's attorney, the man who had almost said something when Radford signed that document an hour ago, pushed through the edge of the crowd. He had his copy of the signed document in his hand. He had been reading it, really reading it, the way he should have read it before they signed. He walked up to Radford and spoke low and close, the way attorneys do when the news is catastrophic and public. "Sir, the documents you signed tonight." Godfrey stopped, started again. The clause in Section 9. It was not the standard holding update, it was a restructure of controlling interest. By signing, the board transferred majority control back to Kane Capital Holdings. Radford blinked once. "That's not what Daxon said it was." "No," Godfrey said carefully. "It is not." The two men looked at each other with the particular silence of a man who trusted his son and a man who knows that trust has just become a liability. Daxon crossed the room in 7 strides. His composure was gone, the senator's posture, the easy confidence, the silver cufflinks. All of it was still there physically, but underneath it, something had collapsed. "This is illegal." His voice hit the room like a stone through glass, heads turned. "You cannot do this, whatever this is. Whatever you think you've done. This will not stand. I will have every lawyer in Texas." Everett's attorney stepped forward. Priscilla Vane, same woman who had sat across from Everett 3 years ago and told him the situation was airtight. She had spent the last 18 months helping him build something even tighter. She was holding a document of her own. "Mr. Whitfield," she said pleasantly, "your board signed the transfer of controlling interest 1 hour and 4 minutes ago. I have 6 witnesses and 4 notarized copies. Your signature is on page 11. She held it up. "This is signed," she said. "This is legal, and this is done." Daxon opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in his adult life, Daxon Whitfield had nothing to say in a room full of people. He knew exactly how that felt now. Everett had felt it for 3 years. It started with phones. One person raised theirs first, a woman near the left side of the room, a minor shareholder who had watched Everett Kane build this company from the outside and then watched the Whitfields take it and never quite believed the story they told about why. She pointed her camera at the screen. Then the man next to her. Then 4 people near the bar. By the time Daxon turned around, half the room was recording. Not secretly, openly. The way people record something when they understand they are watching something that will be talked about for a long time. Radford Whitfield, who had spent his career understanding the weight of a room, understood the weight of this one. He sat down in the nearest chair. He sat down like a very old man. Bridget had not moved. She was standing exactly where she had been when the screens changed, near the center of the room, red dress, champagne flute, completely still. She had not looked at her father. She had not looked at her brother. She was looking at Everett. And after everything that had happened in that room, the silence, the phones, the lawyers, the frozen accounts, she was the one who crossed the floor. She stopped 3 feet from him. She was not crying. Not yet. Her voice was very controlled, the way a person controls their voice when they are 1 sentence away from falling apart. "All this time, you were watching us fall." Everett looked at her for a long moment. He did not look at her with hatred. He did not look at her with the cold satisfaction of a man who has finally won. He looked at her the way you look at the place where something you loved used to be, with a grief that has already done its work and left you standing. "I gave you every chance to stop," he said. "You never did." Bridget closed her eyes. 1 breath. 2. When she opened them, she said something nobody in that room expected. "I know." Just that, 2 words. The most honest thing she had said in 3 years. She turned and walked out of the ballroom. The crowd let her through without a word. Everett reached into his jacket. He pulled out a phone. He pressed play. Radford Whitfield's voice filled the ballroom through the room's own speaker system, patched in remotely just as Everett had arranged 2 days ago with the hotel's AV team, the same team the Whitfields had hired for the event without checking who else had access. Radford's voice was from 14 months ago, a private dinner, a conversation Everett had recorded on a device smaller than a thumbnail sewn into the lining of a jacket. Radford's voice. He'll never see it coming. The man trusts too much, always has. It's his greatest weakness. Daxon's voice. And Corinne, she won't say anything. Radford. She knows which side her future is on. The recording ended. The room was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system. Everett said, "Just in case anyone thought this was unfair, I brought proof." He slid the phone back into his pocket. He did not look triumphant. He looked tired in the way a person looks when they have been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and have finally set it down. She had been near the back of the room all night. Corinne Kane, his sister, the one who had introduced him to Bridget, the one whose voice had been on that recording discussed like a piece on a board. She had heard her name. She had heard Radford's voice say she knows which side her future is on. She walked through the crowd toward her brother. Her face was not performing anything. For the first time all night, it was just her face. A woman who had made a choice she could not unmake and had been living inside the consequences ever since. Everett. He turned. "I'm sorry." He looked at her for a long time, and this moment, was the one that cost him the most. Not Daxon's arrogance, not Radford's cold calculation, not even Bridget's silence over 3 years. His sister. "I know you are," he said. He did not say, "It does not matter." He did not say, "I forgive you." He did not wrap it up cleanly. He just told her the truth of what he saw, and he left the rest for her to live with. Because some debts cannot be paid with an apology. They can only be acknowledged. Corinne nodded once. She walked to a chair at the edge of the room and sat down, and she did not speak for the rest of the night. She had been recording on her phone since the screens changed. Not video, audio, notes. The old-fashioned kind that holds up in print. She approached Everett now, slowly, with the careful respect of someone who understands that the person in front of her has just done something that will outlive the night. "Mr. Kane, Ren Aldridge. I've been covering this story for 2 years. I know who you are," he said. "Would you be willing to talk, on record?" He considered her for a moment. "Not tonight." She started to nod, accepting it. "But call my office Monday," he said. "I think there's a story worth telling properly." Ren Aldridge allowed herself exactly 1 second of satisfaction before she put her pen behind her ear and her professionalism back on her face. "Monday," she confirmed and stepped back into the crowd. The story that ran 4 days later was the cover of the Dallas Business Journal. It was picked up by 3 national outlets by the weekend. Godfrey Marsh, who had almost said something when Radford signed the document, cooperated fully with reporters and later issued a statement that he deeply regretted the role his silence had played. He meant it. That did not make it better. But he meant it. Here is what the Whitfield family lost that night. Kane Industries, now legally restored to Kane Capital Holdings, reclaimed its full operating portfolio. The Texas contracts, the Arizona infrastructure deals, the Nevada land parcels. Every piece of the engine Everett had built returned to the man who built it. The Whitfield Family Trust, which had been leveraged against the company's assets during their 3-year control, was now exposed. Without the company as collateral, their debt was their own. The Houston property portfolio they had bragged about for decades was, as Everett had known from the beginning, largely mortgaged. Radford Whitfield did not go to prison. The legal structure the Whitfields had built was crooked, but not technically criminal. The same way Everett's takeover was legal, because it had been constructed by people who understood the difference between what is wrong and what is prosecutable. But his reputation did not survive the recordings. His name did not survive Ren Aldridge's article. And in Texas, in the particular world of old money and long memories, a reputation and a name are the only currency that actually matters. Daxon resigned from every board he sat on within 6 weeks. 2 of them asked him to leave before he could resign. The last thing Everett Kane did before he left the Whitmore Grand Hotel that night was walk back through the service corridor. The mop was still there, leaning against the wall where he had left it. The bucket, the grey coveralls folded on a chair. He stopped. He stood in front of that mop for a long moment. And anyone watching, anyone who understood what that mop represented, what it had cost him to hold it, what it had taken to hold it quietly, would have understood why he paused. It was not a symbol of his lowest point. It was proof that he could survive his lowest point. There is a difference. He reached out, and he set it down. Gently, like you set down something that deserved respect, even as you left it behind. Then he walked out through the service exit into the Dallas night. No car waiting, no entourage, no announcement. Just a man walking into cool air, head up, coat open, free in a way that winning alone cannot make you free. The kind of freedom that comes from surviving. Priscilla Vane became General Counsel of Kane Capital Holdings. She had earned it 3 years ago. She finally got the title to match. Ren Aldridge's career shifted permanently from local business journalism to investigative corporate reporting. The Kane story was the piece that defined her. Everett moved Kane Capital Holdings headquarters from Dallas to Phoenix. A new city, a new building. His name above the entrance again, but this time he checked the lease himself, line by line. He did not remarry quickly. He did not date publicly. He returned to the 5 a.m. mornings that had built the first version of everything, and he built the second version in near total quiet. The Phoenix offices opened 14 months after the Gala. 712 employees. More than the original company. A new infrastructure contract with the city worth more than anything the Whitfields had ever touched. He sent no announcement. He made no speech. He just opened the doors. On the day the Phoenix office opened, a single envelope arrived at his desk. No return address. Inside was a card, 2 lines handwritten. "I know sorry is not enough. I hope the new office has good light. BT." Everett read it once. He set it down on his desk. He did not throw it away. Some things you keep not because they heal you, but because they remind you what you survived. People ask, sometimes in interviews, sometimes at speaking events he eventually agreed to do, what he would tell the version of himself who was on his knees scrubbing that floor. He always gives the same answer. Hold the mop, do the work, keep your eyes open, and understand that the room you are cleaning today is not the ceiling of what you can become. It is the floor. And then he usually pauses. And he says one more thing. The man you laugh at today might be the one who decides your tomorrow. Patience is not passivity. It is precision. Everett Kane did not disappear after losing his company. He worked, he planned, he documented, he waited for the right moment instead of the first moment. In a world that rewards loudness, quiet preparation is the most underrated power a person can hold. The same weapon used against you can be returned. The Whitfields used a document Everett did not read carefully. Everett used a document the Whitfields did not read carefully. He did not change the game. He simply learned to play it better than the people who taught it to him. That is not revenge. That is education. The end.